I noticed the name Gary Kroeger a couple of years ago on a friend's Facebook thread, and I ran to friend him because I'm a whore that way. I was a fan, and god damn it, he's cute, right? Look at him. Unlike my usual style, I hung back. I didn't jump. I didn't ask him to do Women Who Write. I, just played. I did Facebook thing, what we do, yeah. But once I did ask him, he was amenable. The only problem was, he lives in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Now, even though he lived in LA for many years, I'm just saying, he's here from Cedar Falls, Iowa. He flew in yesterday to be with us. Okay, so he's also visiting a few friends and maybe doing some other things, but he's mainly here to see us, right?
Yes,
he is. That's pretty good. Do you hear me, Albert, Gary, and Larry? You're here. He came from Cedar Falls. But anyway, okay. Gary attended Northwestern University to study theater, radio, television, and film, and was one of the founders of the Practical Theater Company with fellow alums Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Brad Hall. This association caught the eye of Saturday Night Live producers, and the three of them became regulars on the venerable late night show. Okay, little side note, Gary was there when I did those little film pieces, but I was on a location set and we never met, but it was the same years.
You were screwing bigger stars.
I was screwing poor struggling rock boys. That's what I was doing. But no, and wait, there was another synchronicity. Oh, and my stylist Craig Ames, who had absolutely nothing to do with this and is going to be mortified, but he normally does dress me. He yesterday, Sunday, went to Santa Barbara to do. He styled Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Brad Hall for a short film they just did, which was just screened in Santa Barbara. So he was there Sunday. So I told him to tell them that you were going to be here. Okay. So we did all that. After 3 years in New York on Saturday Night Live, Gary moved to Los Angeles for a short-lived series on CBS called Spies with George Hamilton, and later on produced George's daytime chat show. I didn't know that. The George and Elena Show. I remember that show. Television appearances on Columbo, Murder, She Wrote, Night Court, and LA Law led to starring roles in the forgettable films A Man Called Sarge, The Return of the Shaggy Dog, who could forget that, and Archie to Riverdale and back. Gary went on to host revamped versions of the Newlywed Game. We've had Don Berger on, so we love the talk show, the game show guys. And the classic Beat the Clock. He was the weatherman, this is killing me, in the popular episode of HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm, titled The Weatherman. Gary produced and starred in Los Angeles theater productions Mental Cruelty, its sequel, Sentimental Cruelty. Sentimental. And a couple of Guys at the Movies. He opened an Italian restaurant in LA in 1999 where he provided the entertainment with original songs and standards he will have to sing for us. Oh, to be a fly on that wall. In 2003, Gary moved back to Cedar Falls to raise his son, and he works as the creative director of Mud Advertising. He also recently starred in The Man of La Mancha, I Do, and The Music Man at Cedar Falls Playhouse. A political enthusiast with eyes on public service, his blog, Gary Has Issues, has become a recognized thorn in the sides of many a Republican, conservative, Christian, fundamentalist bureaucracy supporting jingoes and anti-intellectual, and has earned him the title of Mr. President from me, which I call him on a daily basis. And you know, I don't think it's that far off from the truth. Please, friend Gary on Facebook, start reading. He is so prolific. Every day he puts up another, and Gary is a friend to the gays, to women, to the left, which is right. And we love Gary. And I do believe he will hold political office, and I'm quite sure of it, and I just hope that this doesn't wreck it for him. But anyway, he's handsome. Gary Has Issues. You go to his Facebook page, Gary Has Issues. He wrote one this morning. He wrote another one this morning, and one yesterday, and he was traveling. I don't know how he does that. You have to teach me. He's handsome. He's whip smart. I can't read this. He's crazy fun.
Is he single?
And he's single! Please welcome Gary Kroeger!
I was
died and gone to testosterone heaven. Lower your bar of expectation here. I'm in the presence of real writers, and this afternoon started with the love child of Roger Daltrey and Robert Plant. And then, you know, Jamie and Kathy with just funny, poignant, relevant work, and Vicki. I mean, I'm awed by this. You know, we basically write these bios ourselves. And it's our delusionary moment where we think that just maybe you'll think, this is the most successful person who ever lived, and you're in our presence. Thank God we skipped Tom Hanks at AFI today. This is Gary Kroeger. I do write a blog, and it is my obsession now because politics are important and we're becoming disenfranchised. Even the good thinkers, the critical thinkers that I call the left, we're getting anesthetized, aren't we? Cauterized a little bit. So I started Gary Has Issues to talk about things in a very human and real way. Now, I'm a reasonably funny guy, and I wrote a funny one that I was going to read for you today, where I compare the Republican candidates to the Cannonball Run with Burt Reynolds. But I'm not going to read it. No, I'm not. Go to Gary Has Issues. It's there. This happens to be the anniversary, which is a terrible word, of my father's death. And so I wrote one this morning that is about my dad. And I won't cry through it. It won't be one of those moments where you have to come in close and see the tears here. But it is hard for me to read.
You can cry.
Cry, women love that.
Well, I wrote this for my father because, and I even start with indulge me for a moment, because I know it's indulgent. But my father was a great American. He was truly a great American. And if I have anything to give, as Vicki so generously thinks that I might, it's because of my father. This marks the 11th anniversary of his passing. And I encourage you to spend the next few minutes reading this because a great American will be revealed to you. My father passed away from congestive heart failure in March of 2001. He was a lifelong smoker whose system had collapsed like dominoes, with one ailment leading to another. Phlebitis, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, prostate cancer conspired to take out his heart. He was too young at 72. There have been so many times in the past decade when I've yearned for his wisdom, but he also lived a full life and he gave his family so much. He grew up during the Great Depression in abject poverty, enlisted in the Army, and was discharged because he was 14. Put himself through college, got an engineering degree, and carved out the American dream. Now let me describe him for you. He was a curly, black-haired, olive-skinned German. He had hairy arms, the kind of forearms that fathers have who immediately get the respect from children. Just under 6 feet tall, he was a white-collar engineer with that blue-collar look. I grew up loving his strength and respecting him. But I could barely endure his strange existentialist philosophies. He'd say, "Stop flicking that light switch. Every time you do that is one less time it'll be turned on and off in its life." But if I flick it one more time, won't that be one more time it's flicked? But that's how he saw things, limited, with finite resources that must be conserved. He died right after George W. Bush was elected, but before 9/11. And I always thought that was a blessing because I think 9/11 would have destroyed him. But just before he died, he said to me with regard to the new president, "This is not the result of Americans' concern. This is the result of their apathy toward leadership." Now, before you dismiss him as a left-winger who simply opposed any victory of the right, let me give you some history. He was raised under FDR, and like most Americans, deeply mourned his passing after 13 years as our president. And whether you liked FDR's politics or not, he was embraced as our president, and my father had a deep respect for him. My father, however, was a conservative man by nature and found his politics evolving to the platform on which the Republican Party stood in the 1950s. Fiscal conservatism, military restraint, and a responsible role in human rights around the world. He hated being categorized, but he called himself an Eisenhower Republican. His conservatism, though, was not so much a political ideology, it simply was who he was. He never carried a dollar in credit card debt, never had a parking ticket, and always lived within his means. He always played by the rules. That meant that I had a secure childhood but I was never going to be the kid with the newest bike or anything that I hadn't earned. And he once said to me, I will never reward you for doing what you're supposed to do. And you're supposed to be a good person. You're supposed to do well in school, and you're supposed to help around the house. My allowance sucked. Only twice did I see my father cry. Soon before he died, he sat with me on the back porch here in LA. And he cried as he revealed his fear of the fate that he saw coming. And once when I was very, very young, he came home from work. He worked at John Deere. And his eyes were wet and red. He held my mother at the front door, and they cried. And I'll never forget that. Our president had just been assassinated. My parents, most of America and the world, were grief-stricken that the person our democratic process had put at the helm was cut down mid-stride. Again, I was very young, but from that moment on, it was clear that all of America changed its view of the political stage, and we felt less secure. And that's when my father's politics began to change too. Now, I've paid attention to politics as long as I can remember. The result of having parents who discuss the issues every night at dinner. So I have my father's ideology recorded in my memory. Vietnam was emerging and people were connected to the world through the evening news. We were all paying attention back then. During this time, civil rights issues moved front and center. And my father started to drift away from the Republicans. He saw the new Republicans becoming entrenched in a platform based on fear. A fear of defining or extending civil rights or anything that amended the Constitution or did not support the status quo. A too irrational fear of communism leading toward a new kind of imperialism. He saw the conservatives falling into policies that supported those fears and moving away from what he embraced above all other issues, egalitarianism. The belief that we are all indeed created equal and deserving of equal rights and respect. So he became a reluctant Democrat. He bristled if anyone lumped him into that bleeding heart category. His human rights ideas aligned more closely with the new liberals, though. He thought that they were just as dangerous when extreme because he did hate to spend a dime that he didn't think was necessary. Over the years that followed, he dismissed Johnson as an arrogant politician. He recognized Nixon's intelligence, even saw him as a moderate, but was repulsed by his personality and policies in Vietnam. Because of Watergate, he was so thoroughly disgusted with politicians and dishonesty, he voted for Shirley Chisholm. Let's pause for a moment. My father, once a Republican, always conservative, voted for an African-American woman in 1972.
Right on.
Go, Dad.
In 1993, my parents came to visit me here in Los Angeles. Before they left Iowa, I had mentioned to them, for some reason, that Sylvester Stallone had just become the first actor to get $20 million for a single movie. I think I told them that to bolster their own hopes for me someday. And to let them know that my own dreams were still in full bloom. My parents drove to LA, but they got lost downtown before finding their way to my West Hollywood apartment. And in their journey, they had accidentally toured East LA. West of downtown, and they witnessed poverty and homeless people under bridges and on off-ramps in a way they hadn't before. Now, they weren't strangers to the big city. They'd visited me in New York and my brothers in Washington, D.C., but the indigent population of LA really struck them at this particular time. They got to my house, and my father got out of the car, a 1990 Ford Taurus of the ugliest, most vivid blue imaginable. And he's wearing his signature pork pie hat. And he came straight up to me. He looked exasperated and whimsical at the same time, and before even saying hello, he said, "In a country where one man can make $20 million for a few weeks' work, there is absolutely no excuse that anyone should starve. It's inexcusable. Inexcusable." And that's the most bleeding heart I ever saw him. Finally, I'd like to share something that will reveal his character and what I attempt to emulate. The first time my parents visited me in LA was just a few weeks before the Stallone story. It was in the mid-'80s when AIDS had just entered the public consciousness. It didn't even have its acronyms yet, AIDS, HIV. It was dismissed as the gay disease. Now, I said before, my parents were conservative, both of them. Very conservative in terms of how they lived. Their values were solid, their sense of responsibilities and fairness resolute, but like many Americans, and in the Midwest in particular, there was a myopic view toward alternative lifestyles. and a closed-minded dismissal of many things considered urban, and homosexuality fell into that category. One evening at dinner, we got into a discussion about the gay disease. My parents felt that it was the result of deviant behavior, and although they certainly didn't feel that any disease was deserved, they saw it as a consequence that could be corrected, and certainly these people should have known better. I proceeded to tell them stories of people that I'd gone to college with, or I'd worked with in LA. People who were good, honest, hardworking, generous, and gay. I told them about a friend who was full of humor, talent, and love that I'd gone to college with, who had just died the most painful and humiliating death imaginable. I told them about dozens, maybe hundreds, of gay men and women that I've known, all of whom are as they were born to be, and do not choose to be gay as a fun lifestyle rich with deviant behavior. I told them about people who happened to be gay, who were just living their lives, but who are now dying from or terrified of an unknown and gruesome disease. I told them that even though their son is straight, this disease affects, challenges, and scares him directly. And those people suffering are his friends. This is where it gets tough for me. I never said another word. From that moment, gay rights were woven into the quilt of their convictions. They marched for, voted for, wrote letters to the editor for gay rights, civil rights, human rights. It's all one and the same. And these moments are the ones that shaped my ideologies. They give me the resolve to keep this discussion moving forward. Even when those frustrations from disagreements seem impossible. My father lives in every breath I take. And I will always be a soldier in his egalitarian fight. I really didn't mean to cry, but thank you. My father deserved the attention. I'd love to end with a joke. But thank you.